there is just a sort of weird thing where a lot of these Silicon Valley guys have this form of libertarianism, or they perceive it, or this notion of the free market. And it is, I don't know. I mean, we could argue about semantics, but who is in favor of corporate capture of government regulations? No one. And to say that it's inevitable or that it happens sometimes, fine. But where is the substitute? There is no substitute. And so rather than arguing for good government regulation, they argue against government regulation and throw up their hands and say there's just no way to get government to function properly. Yet they admit that the internet would not exist but for government regulation. I mean, you call it anything you want: government law, government regulation, government actions. It's just a question of who gets to wield that hammer. The narrow interests of wealthy people and of corporations, or of the broad spectrum of people at large. And that is what I find so counterproductive of the use of this type of libertarian rhetoric, because all it does is it sets up a false dichotomy here, where it's somewhat surprising that Mike Masnick is somewhat surprised by what the Pauls are doing. You shouldn't be surprised. All they are for is corporate feudalism. That's all. Because that's what the lack of government regulation is. It's simply corporate feudalism. You can argue that we can magically go back in time and somehow provide for the encroachment on real property rights by internet, infrastructure, I guess. But the internet wouldn't work unless we were able to have some entity that said, we're going to put this in every building. We're going to go down where, we're going to dig up the sides of the streets or underneath the streets, and we're going to have these tunnels where cables are going to run through. And I suppose you could have gone back in time and said, okay, we're going to dig this ditch on Tuesday. Everybody who wants to lay cable in there, send us an email, or not, I guess not at that time, but call us on the telephone lines that government has provided for by basically saying, yes, you can put telephone poles up, or you can dig up under the ground. I mean, it's just, they're not taking the world as it is. That sometimes you need a force like government to make things happen. Because you simply cannot get all of the different constituencies together at the right time. And all these other governments that have better infrastructure, internet infrastructure than we do, virtually all of them have more governmental control over industry in general.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure a lot of those countries that have better internet services and better broadband access, I think they've even gone so far as to say that internet is a human right.
And nowhere in nature does that exist. It's, the idea that this classification is basically to classify it as a utility in which everyone has certain rights to. There's nothing in the Constitution about having a right to the internet, as far as I know. And you could have states only, states only have the rights. The internet cannot exist without a government. It simply cannot. I suppose sometime in the, If the government was to collapse, the internet may still exist, but it could not get built. And so, sadly, you have the legacy of that. You can't walk away from that. Because then these corporations are just they will destroy the internet. And the question is, the argument isn't whether or not corporations will destroy the internet. Of course they will, if you perceive it as something that is inherently, that the essence of which is free communication between the individuals. Corporations will necessarily destroy it if left to their own devices, because it is not in their interests as corporations. The reasons for their existence is to monopolize these things and profit off of them. And they can only do it if they make this resource scarce in some fashion or another. It's the only way for them to profit off it. Or that, I should say, that is the first means in which they would profit it. It is the lowest hanging fruit. So government must regulate their capacity to do that. Is there a danger that corporations will get the government to regulate it in such a fashion that it will allow the corporations to do this? Yes. But unless you can offer some other type of mechanism, other than government regulation, to how you prevent that, then you just are left with the default position of trying to promote good government regulation. There's just, I know that's not comfortable for libertarians or free marketers or tech libertarians to say, but that's the reality of it. You can't, there's only one way to do this. And you can screw it up and do it a bad way if you cannot compete with the corporate forces. I certainly am in favor of stalling regulation until people feel that they can outmaneuver corporations in this. But it probably would have been much easier to do this 7 years ago. I mean, I do remember the dial-up, and there were certainly people who were talking about money to be made there. But I have seen, at least from a content provider perspective, that there were far less players in this sphere 10, 12 years ago than there are now.